Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Susan Cheka-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. FFRPL raises funds, presents programs, supports special projects, helps to create specialized spaces, and purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the Rochester Public Library. And we welcome you to Book Sandwiched In. We do have a wonderful lineup this season, and we're delighted to be back here for these in-person programs. We ask that you please silence your cell phones at this time. Our thanks go to those who help fund programs like these through FFRPL, the dedicated FFRPL committee members who curate and organize these events, our guest speakers and artists who so graciously share their time and talents with us, the library staff who help with our setup and production, and the thousands of people who attend each year. A bit of housekeeping: we are continuing to ask patrons to register for BSI this spring. We thank you for doing that. We do email the registration links to our subscribers and also post it to our website at ffrpl.org, where you can also sign up to receive our e-newsletters if you aren't already on our list. And of course, you can always call or email us if you need assistance registering. Masking is not required in the library at this time. We are posting the live stream events to the RPL YouTube channel at Rochester Public Library, New York. To access the induction loop in the auditorium, we ask that you set your hearing aid to the T switch. And just a few other announcements. Today is Library Giving Day, and anyone who makes a donation to FFRPL of $5 or more for Library Giving Day today can choose a free copy of one of the 3 beautiful coffee table books you saw displayed on your way into the room. Donations can be made online or in person at FFRPL's bookstore in the space just adjacent to this auditorium, and the store will be open until 3 p.m. today. Funds raised for Library Giving Day will be applied toward the Harold Hacker Advancement of Libraries Endowed Fund, and FFRPL will then grant eligible libraries from across 5 counties money from the fund in support of 2 primary causes: to further education and professional development for librarians and library staff, and to further innovative projects and programs at library sites throughout those counties. We thank you in advance for any support you might be able to provide. Since today we'll be hearing a review of a book that is dedicated to all the people that think differently, we wanted to let you know about one of the newest collections being circulated from Central Library throughout the Monroe County Library System. The new Memory Care collection is a library of things for adults living with cognitive decline as well as for their caregivers. The items in the collection are designed to stimulate, enrich, and bring comfort to people living with Alzheimer's and other related dementias. Items from the Memory Care collection are available for loan to all Monroe County Library cardholders at no cost through the library's Holds service. And we are proud to note that this unique collection of items was developed with funds provided by the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. FFRPL also helped purchase a sensory deprivation tent and other related resources for the Children's Division at Central Library, and the availability of these items and these kinds of items continually demonstrates the library's assertion that the system offers more than you think. Today's review is of the book Visual Thinking: The Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions by Grandin, Ph.D. As the Wall Street Journal notes, Grandin crafts a strong depiction of visual thinking, assembling personal history, historical anecdotes, scientific studies, and societal trends. She provides a vivid recognition of the full breadth of human ingenuity. And our reviewer today is Dr. Dan DeMarley, Ph.D., who is the President and Education Specialist at DeMarley, Inc. Please join me in welcoming Dr. DeMarley to our podium.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. So, how many people actually read the book? Listened to the book? Okay. So, for those who are unfamiliar with, just to give the overview, we're going to talk about some of the key terms that come up into the book. The book itself is a little scattered. We go from what's autism and visual thinking and tie together a bunch of other pieces. So my job is to kind of lay out some of the things that people may not be familiar with and then take some of the key points that she makes in there and then kind of go with those. Now, by the way, visual thinking, what's this? I heard one. A rock that's in water that's reflected in the water, so it looks like it's floating. And one of the pieces here that she really brings out in her book is the difference between verbal thinking and visual thinking. So if you just look at that, and obviously it's a bit of an optical illusion, your visual brain can grasp it pretty quickly. And how many words did it take for me to describe it? And did I describe it well? So part of her theme in her book is that, you know, there are definite differences and definite attributes of being more of a visual versus a verbal, or verbal versus a visual thinker. So this was a recent one. Of course, it popped up on my social media stream, and I said, this would be perfect for that talk. So I'm going to grab this one and post it up there. I could have done a whole thing with optical illusions, but that's not the purpose of our talk today, optical illusions. But it does highlight that visual thinking. Now, who is Temple Grandin? So born in 1947, her job is to design humane animal livestock processing facilities. This is always a little weird when you say, what's her job? Just make sure we can eat beef more efficiently. But she's also a noted speaker because of her best-selling book. And she, as some people might know, she also was diagnosed with autism along the way. And so she is both a pivotal figure in a number of areas, one of which is autism, and she gives a number of talks every year on autism and is quite a well-regarded speaker because she really brought some parts of autism to the popular public. But her main living is actually being an engineer and using that visual thinking brain of hers. And she is well published. These are just some of the various books that she's written. And so if you've read, how many people have read other of her books? Right. Well, so some of this book is kind of a rehashing of some of the ideas that she's had in some of her other books, which is why this one kind of starts with some of those ideas from animals in translation, from visual thinking, from animals in translation, thinking in pictures. And so it's kind of taking those ideas and then bringing them a little bit farther into why is this important? Why is it important that we have an education system that embraces visual thinkers? So what is autism? Right, so she's been diagnosed with autism. Anybody know or love or live with anybody with autism? Grandchildren, nieces, nephews? Right. So, so when I started off in the field, and yes, my picture does not look like my picture on a friend's brochure. My daughter says, you need a new picture. Yes, there's a lot less hair. So when I started off in the field, autism was this. It was kids who sat in corners and did stereotypical movements and were largely nonverbal. And then we ended up with Asperger's syndrome, which mostly came over from England. And these were really smart people who, you know, I always think of the pocket protectors, who were really brilliant but never had any social life. And then, so that was autism. And then along the way, we changed the definition. And we changed some of the instruments that we use. So now we have autism spectrum disorder. And so when I started off in my field, I could very easily tell kids with autism. I could often hear them before I got into the room. Those are the kids with autism. Now it's this autism spectrum disorder. And so kids come into my clinic, and I'm always like, you've been diagnosed with autism. Okay, we're going to go with that. But you're clearly not the kid here. You're somewhere in this spectrum. And to backtrack for a minute, so, you know, as noted, I'm the president of Tomorrow Inc., So I have a clinic where we work with kids from age 4 to 90. You're all kids still, age 4 to 90. And so people come to me when they have, or a loved one has a issue, whether it's autism, intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, bipolar disorder, ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorders, learning disabilities, and they all come to me so I can work with them to get them the right services, and also to then explain to them why their brain works the way it works. And then particularly for our elementary, middle school, high school, college, and adults, get them the right modifications and accommodations. So somebody may have ADHD and they've been successful, but now they're 40 and they have a new boss and everything has to be turned in on time. Not Wednesday, but Friday. Not at 5 o'clock, at 4 o'clock. And that's really hard for them. So they're coming to me to figure out what's going on. Is it really the ADHD? And what accommodations and modifications do you have the rights to get in your workplace? So I see everything, every spectrum you can think of. Now, another term that pops up in the book, just to get everybody on the same page, is neurotypical and neurodivergent. So how many people have heard those words before? Okay, a few more. So I always think of neurotypical is your 1950s, your Mad Men. Your Mad Men, remember that show? Those would be your neurotypicals, and your neurodivergence would be people who don't quite do that. In actuality, neurodivergent means people who is generally means people who have cognitive differences. And so that could be somebody with autism, it could be somebody with a learning disability, again, somebody with severe mental health issues. So neurodivergent is opposite from neurotypical. So the majority of us in this room are neurotypicals. Okay? And neurodivergent is a really empowering word. It's an advocacy word for people who are different, because it gives you something else he talks about in the group, in the book that we'll come back to, is gives you a tribe. So part of having autism, part of being a visual thinker, is not really fitting in. Because if the majority of the population is auditory or visual or verbal learners, and you're a visual learner and further out on that spectrum, then, as she rightly points out in the book, you're going to struggle in our typical educational system. So having a term like neurodivergent gives you an entryway into a tribe, and tribes are really important in life. I'll come back to that one a little bit later. Now, I'll go back one, previous. She also references special education. So how many people are familiar with special education? All right. So special education isn't actually what you think it is. Special education is a federally mandated service. So all of your local school districts have a special education department. They only have one because it's mandated by law. So anybody familiar with Section 504? Right. So Section 504 is a civil rights law. It came out, it was passed by Congress at the same time the major civil rights laws were being passed. And it said that you cannot discriminate against somebody on the basis of a disability. But the problem with Section 504 is it had no money. So it mandated all these school districts across the country do something, but gave them no money, which is why 2 years later, they passed the initial law that gave us special education. So special education is a mandated service, and it's an entitlement law that says that if somebody qualifies, if you have autism and your autism is severe enough, then you are entitled to, and your school district is mandated to follow the law to give you services, which should fall under the big rubric of special education. And under that rubric, we have speech, OT, PT, music therapy, special education, school counseling services, mental health services, a whole gamut of supports available to people who fall into that group of needing those services. Some people with autism don't fall into that category. As she points out correctly, when autism was this, those people pretty much automatically required special education. When you have an autism spectrum disorder, then some of those people, if these are the people who need special ed, some of these people are outside that. They may need a 504 plan, but they won't necessarily need special education. And one of her correct criticisms is that if you're a visual thinker, then you can struggle significantly, but that just being a visual thinker doesn't qualify you for special education services. If you're visual thinking, which again, she's going to define as a spectrum, if some of that falls into that category, then you could end up needing special education services. It would be easier for some of our people who are visual thinkers if they automatically qualified, because then they could get the services they needed, but they don't. Now, what is a visual thinker? So I was going through trying to pull up her definition of a visual thinker, and so what she says, it's a spectrum. So again, it's a spectrum, and essentially the way she initially said it in her first book, Thinking in Pictures, is that somebody who is a visual thinker sees images in their minds. You know, instead of thinking, having how many of us, when you're just thinking to yourself or daydreaming, are talking to ourselves in our head? How many have that little voice in their head? How many people, when they're just daydreaming, have visual images flash through your heads? Right. So, and how many do both? You're picturing that beautiful island and having a narration at the same time. You're picturing that finished thing you're going to bake and have narration going through your head at the same time. So, say images in their mind, often in rapid fire associations, and tend to really like maps, arts, mazes, and that don't need directions is how many of you could get home if without your phone giving you directions if your main road home was blocked? Okay. You know, you hear those stories about those dogs who get lost and the family moves and it's like 200 miles away and the dog makes it home. That's like visual. That's visual. I don't know. We don't know how the dog actually does it, but that would be a visual thinker. And one of the things that's happening, of course, today is that many of us rely on our phones to tell us directions, so we're not actually developing, and our kids and our grandkids aren't actually developing that visual brain, that visual map in their head that tells them where they are. Okay? If the FBI told you today that you had to drive alternate routes to work every day, how many of you would automatically know at least 3 different ways to get to work? Okay. Right. So those are some of our visual thinkers. You have it all laid out in your head of how to do that. Now, she also talks about object visualizers versus spatial visualizers. And I'm not going to go that much into that, but clearly there's mechanical people and more hands-on people, and having a mix on your team if you're doing something important can be helpful because there's slightly different parts of your visual brain. Now, when she first started her first book 25 years ago, there was a big hoopla in the field because she was saying, you know, she's autistic and she's a visual thinker. Of course, that's what we call an N of 1, subject of 1. We have one subject, her. So there's a big rush in the field to say, well, everybody who has autism must be visual thinkers. And that's not true. So just to dispel that, there are people with autism and there are people who are visual. That should have been a much bigger circle, by the way. I couldn't fit it quite in. But there are people who are visual spatial thinkers and there are people who are in the middle. Okay? And just in terms of her data, from from what the study she was speaking to, about 33% of the population, I put down 33 and it kept graphing it as 32. 33% are visual thinkers, about 24 are auditory sequential thinkers, and most of us are a mix. Did anybody do her survey in the book? There's a survey in the book where you can go through and you can answer a series of 16 questions and yes or no. One of those is, do you like public speaking? So you can tell automatically that if you like, since I like public speaking, I'm more of the auditory people. I'm more on that side. Now, she also mentions a fascinating thing in there, and she saying, how do I tell the difference between an auditory versus visual? So she comes up with, and because we're at the library today, she comes with a great little example. Where is there a steeple near us? Right now, is there a steeple near us? Yeah, right, at St. Mary's. Right. So within less than a quarter of a mile, we have a steeple. Anybody know what it looks like? So when you leave today, if you head out the way, the steeple is right there, okay? So you head out the parking garage, right there. It's a little hidden by the church. You have to look a little bit further. It's on top of that building. Okay, how many people parked in the parking garage today for you visual thinkers? Okay. What's on the front of the other part of the old part of the library? You walked by it coming in here. Yeah, across the street. What's on the front? Are there any people on it? Yes, there are people on it. Anybody know how many? When you leave today, make sure that you actually, look over across the street at the other part of the library. It's a beautiful building, by the way. Are there any quotes over there? Okay, there are two quotes. Anybody happen to know? So my favorite one over there, which is always a little, I'm not quite sure what exactly it means. Because it definitely but this one is, the shadow will be behind you if you walk into the light. Which is like, is that books? Are books the light? The library the light? Like, which light? Is this a religious light? Which light are we talking about? Or is it literally, and a shadow's going to be behind you, you walk into the light? I mean, which way are we going with that? So anyways, visual thinking, people who are real visual thinkers will notice those details. So one of her examples from her earlier books in this book is that animals, cows, cattle, if there's one little thing out of place, and they're going through that chute, somebody left their red shirt hanging on something, it will mess everything up because they notice every single little detail. And so some of us, particularly people with autism, will notice every little detail. Okay? And in my office, when kids come in, there's a diploma and other stuff, and some of it is purposely off kilter because it drives my patients with OCD crazy. And if it really drives them crazy, they'll mention it to me. And I'm like, okay, you did notice that. I also have little toys over here, like display toys. My kids with ADHD, it's like, they run across my room. It's like, no, wait. You're on that side of the room. Those stay over there. It's like a great little ADHD test for those kids. Okay, visual thinkers. How many people have lived in Rochester for over 30 years? All right, where's this? Ooh, I heard it. The Veterans Bridge. All right, the view from, and this is the not the fence, I'm completely being not auditory right now, verbal. The guardrail, the beautiful old Art Deco guardrail there. If you ever have a chance to walk across that bridge, especially in the fall, it can be a little scary because those cars come really fast at you. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's a totally gorgeous view from up there, okay? Now, what she points out in the book is, why is this important? Why is recognizing visual thinkers important? And she has a couple chapters on this topic. So we have our auditory language learners, we have our visual learners. And so what she's pointing out is that we have a lot of wasted potential because kids who tend to be purely visual, and there are some, and I have some that are absolutely brilliant, unbelievable brains. They can just look at information and process it like crazy, but they don't do well in school. So some kids can just look at 64 and tell you, that's the square root is 8. It's like, well, how'd you figure that out? Looks obvious, it's 64. It's like, well, how'd you figure that out? I can't tell you, it's just 64, right? So they just know that. So they can't show you their work. So if you're purely visual, what % of a school day do you think actually taps into those skills versus language skills? Very little. The majority of school is people talking at you, not showing you stuff. Okay? So because of these things, as she points out correctly, we have a lot of wasted potential. As she says a couple times, why don't we make this there anymore? Why don't we produce these things? Because those jobs aren't here. Those jobs are now overseas because we're not teaching those. We don't have essential technical skills taught in schools. And as she points out, if you just have something designed by auditory learners and not visual learners, you can end up with pretty bad situations. Okay, because sometimes you need somebody who just can look and read a diagram. Somebody who just picture rates and ratios when they're looking at things and say, that probably is not going to work. It may sound great, but it's probably not going to work. Now, the other piece in terms of lost potential, these are just, this is from March 24th. The Pentagon needs skilled workers like crazy. We're shipping all kinds of our weapons to Ukraine, and because of cost cutting and because of centralization, we need workers in factories producing anything along that line. In fact, the U.S. just agreed to make 5 nuclear Virginia-class subs. So up in Groton, Connecticut, electronic boats needs 5,500 highly skilled workers to go up and do that. So when kids come to me, or college students come to me, or elementary, middle schools, I'm talking to their parents about these things, it's like 20 years ago, we'd say, we're working towards a college diploma. But if you look around the world, this is to say we need to think differently. These are kids, this is from 2012, kids in Indonesia getting to school. Their visual thinking skills are a lot different than our kids. This is, again, Iraq in 2015, kids going to school. So those kids and kids across the world are having a different learning environment than our kids are. Now we have AI coming in. How many jobs will AI replace? How many jobs is AI going to replace? Well, they're not going to replace some of those jobs good visual thinkers have. If I'm going to hire a plumber, a mechanic, an auto mechanic, I want a good visual thinker. I want somebody, if I'm going to have my kid have surgery or me have surgery, I want a surgeon who can picture the entire circulatory system in their head and have the fine motor skills to be able to pull that operation together. So what do we need to do? And some of the things she points out, we need more hands-on learning in class. We need more shop welding, drafting, auto mechanics. That is available in Monroe County, but it's available through BOCES. So WMOCO and EMCC. So, but what happens then is kids have to say they're in 10th grade, they have to decide in 11th grade, are they going to kind of stick to that straight college track, or are they going to do a vocational track? And their parents have to buy into that. And of course, in our society, everybody's supposed to be shooting for college. And so we need more of this. We need more of those things. And we need Oops. Remember these? Did you ever try to buy one of these nowadays? You know how hard it is to find a good old map, right? We need maps. You know, how many of your kids can't tell you they're 3 blocks from your house how to get there? Because the phone has just done it for them. We need actual maps. Here, go find your way, okay? So we need actual maps. We need, this is a great 7-year-old joke, okay? What is brown and sticky? Now, if you're an auditory verbal learner, you're going through your language dictionary trying to think of something that would go along with brown and sticky. If you're a visual learner, you're going through your visual Rolodex of anything that could be brown and sticky, a Twix bar. And of course, if you're talking to an ADHD 7, 8, 9-year-old, of course, their answer is poop. Well, their answer is poop every time. Those impulsive kids, poop, obviously. Well, what is brown and sticky? Ready? A stick. A stick. Now, so we need to build our grandkids' vocabulary. Okay, so obviously if you have an auditory learner, you're reading books like crazy. If you have a visual learner, you need to go places. You need to build their visual map. As she says in her book, she got better thinking, writing, as she had more visual things to add to her. This is an old term. I say this term Rolodex, and kids are like, what the heck are you talking about? What's a Rolodex? A card file? What's a card file? They're electronic, they're neuro map. And video games just don't do it. Yeah, that video game may have some things shown, like a mountain, but that's far different than actually being there and looking at that thing. Even your eyes function different. The sound of space around you versus there. We need to get kids into the library, for example, to look at some of those great maps and visual things and artwork. And the building across the street, which you're going to look at on your way out of here now, okay? So get out and walk. Have your kids, this is a fun way. We do this with our grandkids all the time, okay? We're driving between their house and my daughter's house, and we'll be like, oh, I forgot which way I'm supposed to go. Or, we're 3 blocks from home. Which way do I go? We live in the city, so there's lots of choices. 3 blocks from home. You go all kinds of ways, 3 blocks from home. So which way do we go? Of course, then they tell us, and then we might go the wrong way. And I was like, no, you turned the wrong way. Which way do we go? So they actually can develop that sense of space. Important thing, this is Temple's term, label lock. If you have a child with a disability, don't focus. Having brain freeze. Don't only look at their disability. I'm constantly telling people their most important thing they do is focus on their kids' strengths. What they can do versus what they can't do. Yes, we have to spend time, energy, money, resources on remediating the difficulties, but at the end of the day, your kid has to feel strong, capable, and competent. And how do we do that? One of the ways we do that, visual spatial things. Who knows what this is? Okay. How many people still have a pincushion? How many people can tell me what this little thing's for? My 5-year-old granddaughter was fascinated the other day when I pulled one out because I had to mend something. Sewing. And by the way, why do kids struggle with reading? How would you actually say that word? What is the EW sound? Ooh. Ooh. So how would you actually say that word? Sue. Right? How do we say it? So? Wow, visual learners out there, wait, if the EW doesn't make that sound, what are you doing with that S in front of that? No way that says that word, right? In fact, I had to double check it today. I spelled it. I'm like, that can't be how you spell so. I knew it was so, but I'm like, I'm doing a presentation, I better just check. It's like, no, that's how you spell it, so. So what gives people feelings of power? Money, status, growing a tomato. What gives kids a sense of power? Building something, doing something, constructing something, playing with grandma and grandpa, putting together that train set, doing that thing that was hard, right? So the more we can get kids into hands-on activities, the better they're going to be. Now, what we do know is here's from March 26th, the RCSD is looking to give students more opportunities to be in vocational education. So part of our job is to demand that those things happen. You know, local school districts don't have to send all their kids to BOCES. They don't have to make them choose right there. They could have some of their own programs in district. And the RCSD is to slowly go from one school to another. So this is like a 10-year program. Some of the kids in school right now will be graduated before their school has a vocational program. We have to demand a faster pace for our kids, and literally our nation may depend upon it. Support businesses that have neurodiverse workers and owners. So locally, we have the Special Touch Bakery. They make wonderful baked goods. They're based over at the School of the Holy Childhood. So they have neurodiverse workers there, and they have, and it's owned by an organization that does that. Now I get to show off, right? I get to show off. My wife didn't notice me putting these on today. I got my special fancy socks today. This is, of course, Albert. All right. Because I got my socks from, oops, I got my socks from John's Crazy Socks. Okay. So John's Crazy Socks. This is John right here. Okay. John has Down syndrome. So when he went through and graduated age 21, there was nothing for him to do, and his dad was in between jobs, and they said, we're going to start a sock factory. And we're going to hire a bunch of neurodiverse learners to come in and make socks. And they have great socks. And you want fun socks? They have really fun socks, okay? So if you need a new pair of fun socks or just regular socks, buy them from a company that's partly owned by a neurodiverse person and employs an amazing array of neurodiverse and neurotypical individuals to do that. So speak with your dollars. If you can, support organizations that support people who are neurodiverse, because there's a lot of them out there who are looking for work and jobs. And that's the end of my presentation. So what questions do people have?
May I ask, are the suppositions and solutions that you're suggesting yours, or are they temple Grandin?
Some of those are Temple Grandin's, and some of them are my additions to some of the work that she's doing. But she's, yes.
And a follow-up question, you talked about the biodiversity